alive is a very difficult process, which we have a mechanism within us called our ego and our intellect to help us with that process. And the ego and the intellect is always defining, labeling, and analyzing. And those are none of the work of the soul and seeing and feeling. So in order to survive in the world, the ego and the intellect make a pact, and they decide and decipher and analyze, and out of the data that is given us by our environment, we create a model or a mode of life or being that may be nothing of what life or our being is really about. So the struggle is to bypass the ego and get back to the soul and the spirit, beyond just surviving. And finally we're at a place, I feel, in humankind, that we are beyond surviving now, that we have our needs met, and we are exploring and expanding into a level of becoming aware again of our soul and our spirit.
So basically what you're suggesting is that each human being has this aspect, the soul aspect, the spirit aspect, and some of the powers that we hear about, psychic abilities, are associated with this portion of ourselves. And as our ego develops so strongly and gets involved in intellectual activity and in thinking about protecting itself and thinking about survival, it somehow acts to cut off that soul awareness.
Yeah, the ego is kind of like the parent is the ego when you're a child, because it sees that if you're going out in the street, your parent will say stop and grab your arm. The ego will do the same thing. If it sees you going up an avenue that you have not experienced before, whether it's in a feeling way, in a way of your spirit, or in a way of your soul, it will grab you by the arm and say, no, don't go. The fear about getting into psychic things, and the fear of exploring our deep feelings, the fear of crying when we're touched or moved, is the ego saying, now wait a minute, we've got everything under control, don't worry about a thing. It becomes our parent. And we have a hard time graduating from one level to another. We graduate from high school, we graduate from college, and we can graduate from our parents, but then we have that ego that we hardly ever graduate from until something either causes a breakdown or a breakthrough. Then usually breakdown precedes breakthrough. And most people get hung up in the breakdown part of it because the ego gets terrified and thinks that it's the loss of the beingness.
And yet I would think that we wouldn't necessarily want to break free of our ego the way we break free of our parents. It's something that I think maybe the goal might be more to have it work in harmony with the other parts of us.
It is, and the interesting thing is most people don't even know what a spirit and a soul is, or an ego, and they just hear that it's something that you shouldn't have a lot of. And I have kind of come back on the scene in my classes to say you must honor your ego, but you also must have a sort of a conference with that Trinity within you. Mm-hmm. And realize that each part of your soul and your spirit and your ego has a part in your body. The heart is operated by the spirit. The soul is operated by the will. And the ego is operated by the intellect. So the one that gets to be the bully and the bad guy and the biggie here is the ego and the intellect, because it's smarter. It can outwit that soul and that spirit. And that heart sometimes gets forgotten in its feeling level. And the spirit is left, and the soul, who has a strong desire, gets left. And the ego, when you sit down with it and discuss that this is not going to annihilate you, this, what I am venturing forth into, is not going to be an annihilation, then the ego settles down. It's just like telling your parent, listen, I'm going away for the weekend, but I'm going here, and I'm going there, and I'm going to be fine, and I'm going to be taken care of. The ego will settle back and take a back seat. This is why it's important for all things of the spirit and the soul to be done in a guided way, like meditation. You're not going to want to meditate when you're driving on the freeway. You're not going to want to meditate when you're in the middle of a class experience or you're learning something. You're not going to want to meditate when you're shopping or get a great idea, a soul inspiration, when you're picking up the baby from the babysitter.
Because the ego would feel a little threatened in
Well,
those
the
cases.
ego needs to be in charge in those cases. The ego needs to be in charge when you're driving. That's what happens on long-distance drives. The ego thinks, oh, well, I can sit down and relax. The spirit takes over, and in a long drive we'll start to hallucinate. And then we think, I didn't have a drink at the last stop. Why am I seeing people running across the road? The spirit sees all kinds of things. At any point that it lets go of the reality that we're looking at, it sees more things than just this reality.
So if I'm interested, say, in cultivating my ability to see with my soul, to see with my spirit, I kind of need to call a conference together. And
right. First
say,
of all, we
okay.
have to identify who's who and what's what and where those different parts of us are operating. Because you have to realize that a person who is very soulful is very willful and has a strong will, and you can have a tremendously soulful person who creates amazing artwork or is a wonderful singer or dancer, but if he doesn't have a strong ego that can put him out there in the world, he's the suffering artist, the struggling one.
Let's define the soul a little bit more. You mentioned that the spirit operates the heart.
The heart
soul
operates through the heart.
Spirit operates through the heart.
In the body. Because the spirit only exists in the body by our choice. We choose a body for our soul and our spirit to operate in. And that body then has an ego. And the ego is kind of the operator, the conductor.
No. And the soul you mentioned is
the soul is
will.
Our desires. And the will is that which creates contact with the desire body. And the desires are that which is of the Father. The word itself means day, which is of, and sire, which is the Father. So desires are of the Father. That which you desire, that which is your will, is God's will. It is deeply seated in us, and we never realize that that is such an important place to know. We must know what our true desires are, which are different than wants and wishes. For wants are from the ego, wants and needs and wishes, because the ego needs to eat, and the ego needs to sleep, and the ego needs new clothes. But the soul desires to be a great painter, to be a great dancer, to be a great writer, to be a great speaker.
And often as we grow up, I suppose these things become confused. And
very confused.
We're also told by our parents and teachers and so on what we should desire, and we often kind of get lost in that then.
But the parent's ego says, what do you mean you want to go into space? You want to get in my business building houses. You're going to follow your father's business and your father before him. No, I want to build houses in space. Oh, it's such a difficult thing to look at, that we first have the structure of our ego of our parents, then we have our structure of the ego of our own body that is trying to keep agreement with that because that's how our needs get met. And the spirit and the soul is always struggling to say, but what about me? I created this. I created this. God and I had a conference about what we wanted, and we created this ego, and we created this body, and we asked our parents if we could come, and we came down. Sometimes we just tell our parents we're going to come, and we just come down here, and then everything gets forgotten. And I believe that really life is 90% remembering what we came here for. But we first have to realize we did come here for something. And if you look at your deepest desires, that's the secrets of what you came here for.